Hello. Today we will be discussing on British modernism. Uh, of course, British modernism, modern poetry. So these are the different words which we use, and so they are actually different, but they all have some basic ideas, and they have absolute relation, within themselves, and we would be talking about it. So British modernism. Let's try to understand what British modernism is. British modernism, it's a movement, and it's a movement in culture. So when you say a cultural movement, it doesn't mean just writing. It doesn't mean just painting. So you find it in all forms of human expression. So since we study literature, let us focus on literature. But keep in mind that this influenced painting, this influenced sculpture, this influenced music, and other forms. So in fact, I have made a video on modernism and postmodernism, where I would be involving all these aspects as well. You can check that video as well. But otherwise, so this is the basic idea. And so when we talk about avant-garde movement, I'd be involving a little bit of painting, where so the idea is much more clear. But anyway, so we will be talking about British modernism in this particular video. British modernism is, as I mentioned, it's a cultural movement where people, deliberately differed from Victorian, structure, Victorian, literatures, Victorian styles, or whatever we would like to consider. So there was a deliberate and purposeful transition from traditional. So of course, every movement has some leaps in terms of, styles, structures, whatever. But this was a deliberate, you know, a deliberate shift from traditional, forms. So, and so that is one thing which we can see. And it was a period where there were lot of changes in society which was taking place. So when we say society, it includes social changes, economical changes, political changes, as well as changes in technology, changes in approach, and so on. So when there is a change in society, automatically expression of human beings also change. So that is that's not rocket science. That is something which is natural, right? So when things around change, how we speak change, how we represent ourselves change. So art, writing, music, theater, all these forms of the period change from how it existed before. With it, what happened was, there was a threat of World War, right? So the threat of World War, I mean, even before World War took place, people knew that there is a war coming, right? So all the countries were hoarding weaponries, so they were training for it, right? So the threat of war which was present, then the World War first, took place. Then there was various revolts, Irish Revolution, Russian Revolution, and some other changes in different countries took place. So that also influenced. Then on the other side, there were human rights activities, human rights movements like women's suffrage movement and feministic movement. First wave of feminism had already been been popular, and there was industrialization and technology which changed the society completely. So these are the elements which change society, and these are the elements which change how people expressed as well, right? So the themes of writing, the themes of painting, and the manner in which they are represented all change because of the these reasons, like World War, revolutions, suffrage movement, industrialization, urbanization, and all this. So the total change which occurred in the beginning of 20th century up to the mid 20th century, we call it as modernism, right? So this is what modernism is. So modernism is not just about writing. Modernism is not about, to an extent. So there are two extremes. So if you ask what is modernism, some students will say it is about writing because, so they are purely focusing on, the works of the writers which has been prescribed. So if you ask what is modernism to somebody else, so they would say modernism is wearing new dress, wearing different kinds of styles, having different kinds of styles. So I mean, so they're both not wrong, but it is not the complete picture at least. So the modernism is a very large change which was encountered in 20th century, and we would be learning about. So what did it comprise of? What did modernism comprise of? So one of the things which it majorly comprised of was fragmentization. Fragment, what is it? So instead of a whole, you take a piece, right? And you take piece by piece, and and with that you try to understand the whole. So that is fragmentization. So fragmentization can be in terms of structure, in terms of content. Both the things are true in terms of modern expressions. Of course, I will be giving examples of writing, but you can take example of other things as well. Maybe here and there I can give example of painting. For example, fragmentization, you just Google, cubism painting, and you understand what fragmentization is. So it is, a painting is not complete. The painting, is understood through minute details, and piece by piece you put together, and you get a bigger picture. So that is fragmentization. And fragmented structure means that, so the in terms of writing, so it is not a whole, right? So a character is not presented. Oh, usual presentation of a character as he was a stout, short man, wearing a top hat and a monocle, whatever. So usual presentation is like that. But a modernist presentation is, all of these details are not given at once. Not just a physical details, but a mental picture of a person is not presented at once. Through different actions, through different descriptions, we try to get a character of a person. A character is never introduced at once, right? So, here you see an episode, there you see, the character doing something. Through this, you get a whole idea of a character. So that is fragmentization, which is, one of the major features of modernism. So you take a look at poem, Love Song of Alfred J. Prufrock. So in the poem Love Song of Alfred J. Prufrock, what do you see? So Prufrock is not suddenly introduced there. Through, what he thinks, through what he does, through what he says, right? We are trying to get a picture of the whole character. So that is, one of the major features of British modernism. Same goes for painting, but I give example of writing much more better. Then stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is, it's a narrative technique where you are presented through the, the consciousness of a person. What do I mean by that? So you're not just presented what a character does, but also what character thinks, and what goes in mind before somebody hands over a pen. So there are so many things going on in their mind, right? So they are presented in front of us. And other issue of stream of consciousness is, stream of consciousness is not like, it's linear. So we don't think in a linear matter. So if a question is posed in front of us, what did you do today? So we are not going to give a chronological action sequence, right? So we try to make it, but that is not how our mind works. So we go back and forth. So, and that is how stream of consciousness is presented in writings as well. it's also something which is adopted in movies sometimes. When a person is having a monologue talking to themselves, they go back and forth. So this happened, then this happened, oh no, before that, something else had happened. So so stream of consciousness is a technique which became very popular during modernism. In fact, it took that is when it was introduced. Rejection of traditional narratives. What is narrative? So different narrative techniques are present in storytelling. And the major forms of storytelling is linear and chronological. That is, there is a starting point, there is an ending point, and one after the other events are presented to us. But in modern narrations, that is not how it is. It is like, so a little bit of here, then here, then here, then here. So you might have watched many movies like this, like, where the storytelling is not linear. First few things happens, then something else happens, then we go back to the past, then again to the future, and so on. So I mean, recent popular movie Oppenheimer has this technique, right? So that is way different than the traditional technique of linear narration. So, and that is what makes modernism so different. That is what makes modern writing so different. Then, so focusing on consciousness. So what is consciousness? Consciousness is like, so the internal dialogues, we can say. So the internal dialogues and psychological analysis of things were presented during modern writing. So and so that was introduced for the very first time, we can say. So there were things which were present before that, for example, the novel Portrait of a Lady, where the thoughts of the characters are present as well. But so it wasn't as successful. I mean, it isn't. It works in an entirely different way. Like, so in modernism, since the psychological theories were much more prominent because of Sigmund Freud's analysis of dream and other works which were, Carl Jung's work as well. So people understood things even better. And so the primary focus was given to psychological analysis in their work. So Mrs. Dalloway's work, I mean, sorry, Virginia Woolf's work, Mrs. Dalloway, it's a beautiful work. It's an amazing novel which captures the essence of writing with the help of psychology, writing for psychological understanding of people. So Mrs. Dalloway can be an example. Then another aspect of modernism is the use of symbolism and imagery. So I mean, I mean, if there is one particular movement which used most amount and most complex symbolism and imagery, if it is modernism, no doubt about it. So, for example, the breeding of lilacs, how it represents the pain which is felt by a person. So, all these things are definitely something which is which was not used, or it would be even unimaginable for a person living in a Victorian time. So that is something which is magnificent, regarding the way the poems stories are presented in front of us. And same goes for language and form. So people, modernists, so they deliberately wanted to, invent new forms. They deliberately wanted to invent new ways of expression. So that, we will discuss in detail when we go to, avant-garde. And avant-garde, you can refer it and add a little bit here as well. So this is the major idea about modernistic movement. Some of the people, of course, you have studied about WB Yeats and WB Yeats, T.S. Eliot, and Auden. So those three, anyway, I need not explain much about them. But there are two. people whom I wanted to majorly focus on was Virginia Woolf, who wrote prose. So T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, and Auden write poetry, right? So Virginia Woolf majorly wrote prose, and her novel Mrs. Dalloway is the finest example of modernist work. Then we have Ezra Pound. Ezra Pound was an American poet who who used imagism the best, right? So he came up with the imagism movement, and he used the images best to convey the pains and thoughts of the time. So and Ezra Pound is another name which we have to remember. Then one more name we need to remember is James Joyce Ulysses. So James Joyce Ulysses is a brilliant piece of writing. It is it's a I mean it's a every chapter of the novel is different. Like it can be read in different ways. So there is a famous statement regarding James Joyce Ulysses, that every time a reader reads James Joyce Ulysses, so they feel it as a new novel. So did the novel change or the person change? So it's just a humorous, or not humorous but interesting statement which is being made on James Joyce Ulysses. But it's a significant work which you might quote in your answers or your essays if you're writing. So so that is the major idea of modernistic movement. Uh, One more thing which I would like to include here is some of the elements which were used, some of the major focus of the modernism. So there were the major focus of modernism were one, impact of war, no doubt about it. So they wrote about how war is being devastating to human life. So not just in poetry. So poetry, you have numerous examples for it, whether it is from T.S. Eliot, whether it is from W.B. Yeats, or if it is even to an extent Auden speaks about the pains of war. So but also in prose, right? So Mrs. Dalloway is one example I take it, because with one example I can discuss so many things. So in Mrs. Dalloway, so a person having PTSD because of war is, so that's a beautiful character which is being present. So then there were separate poets called as war poets during the period, that period. So war was a significant focus of many writing. So another focus was urbanization. That urbanization in the sense, how living in this city environment where you are under watch by people all the time. At the same time, you are being alienated. So that reminds me a statement, a Latin statement. Um, Magnus Civitas, Magnus Solitudo. Greater the city, the bigger the city, the larger the solitude of a person is. That is, in alienation, like, a person feels like, I am in the middle of people, but I do not belong here. So that is, one of the results of urbanization. And, that urbanization is reflected very well in the poetry of modernists. And, you can see that. Then, we are going to talk about the complexity of life. Complexity of the life is, so one of the prominent idea is degeneration. So the society is degenerating in terms of morals and values, in terms of attitude, in terms of some of the values like learning. So this degeneration is a primary focus of modern writing. So so that is another focus of modern writing. But one thing you need to keep in mind is it is not just a literary movement, but it's a movement of art, and it's a movement which is related to music. It's a movement related to theater, dramas, and other performances as well, sculptures, of course. So and architecture as well. So we can't forget architecture. So this is how modernism was developed, and these are the characters of modernism, focus of modernism, as well as this is the central idea of what the British modernism stood for. Thank you.